The sun had barely begun to stretch its golden fingers across the endless plains, painting the tall grass in hues of amber and copper. Jackson sat perched on the edge of a small rise, his horse snorting softly beneath him, the leather saddle creaking as he shifted his weight. The world around him was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of prairie grass and the distant cry of a hawk circling lazily in the sky. Jackson had always loved mornings like this, when the land seemed to hold its breath waiting for the day to awaken fully. Yet even in this serene calm, he sensed the restless pulse of life moving in subtle, hidden ways. He had been riding since before dawn, scouting the land, checking his fences, and making sure the cattle were safe. Jackson had earned a reputation as a man who could read the plains like an open book. He knew the signs of approaching storms, the tracks of wolves or coyotes, and the subtle shift of the wind that might indicate a herd of buffalo moving nearby. But nothing in all his years of wandering had prepared him for the faint, desperate sound that carried on the morning breeze, a small strained cry, almost swallowed by the vastness of the prairie. Jackson's hand went instinctively to the reins, and he nudged his horse forward, ears straining. "Easy, boy," he murmured, his eyes scanning the horizon. The cries came again, more urgent now, a combination of fear and exhaustion. They were coming from the direction of the river, a narrow ribbon of silver threading its way through the tall grass and clusters of scrub oak. Jackson's heart quickened, not with fear for himself but with concern for whoever was in trouble. He had seen many perils on the plains, but the sound of a child in danger was different. It cut deeper, lodged somewhere between instinct and conscience. As he approached the riverbank, the landscape shifted. The grasses grew taller and wetter, the soil softer and muddier under the hooves of his horse. Jackson slowed, scanning the banks carefully. That's when he saw it. A small figure tangled among the fallen branches of a partially uprooted tree, struggling against the current that lapped dangerously close to the edge. The child's arms flailed, catching on twigs and roots, and Jackson realized the boy had been trapped for some time. The river, though calm on the surface, hid a dangerous undercurrent. A wrong step, and the boy could be swept away in an instant. Without hesitation, Jackson dropped from his horse, boots sinking slightly into the wet earth, and waded into the river. The water was colder than he expected, biting through his jeans and numbing his fingers, but he didn't think about the cold. He only thought about the trembling child in front of him, whose small face was streaked with mud and tears. "Hold still, little one," Jackson called out, his voice steady and reassuring. "I've got you. You're going to be okay." The boy looked up at him, eyes wide with fear and confusion, his small chest rising and falling rapidly. "Help, please," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the water's gentle rush. Jackson extended his hand, gripping the child's arm carefully and pulling him away from the tangle of roots. The child clung to him instinctively, arms wrapping around Jackson's neck, and Jackson felt the weight of his frailty, the vulnerability that belonged to youth. In that moment, the plains seemed to hold their breath along with him. Once he had the boy on solid ground, Jackson sat back on his heels, brushing the mud from the child's hair and clothes. "Easy now. You're safe," he said, offering a half-smile. The child sniffled, nodding weakly, but there were still tremors of fear running through his small frame. Jackson could see the bruises beginning to form on his knees and hands, the dirt caked into every crease. His heart ached. He had children of his own once, before life had taken them in ways that left only memory and longing. And in this moment he felt a protective surge, a fierce need to keep this fragile life from harm. The boy's gaze drifted toward the horizon, toward the distant tree line, as if he were searching for something, or someone. Jackson followed the look and realized the boy's tribe must be nearby. He hadn't seen another person, but the boy's familiarity with the landscape suggested he was not alone. Jackson tilted his head, considering the situation. "You're not far from home, huh?" he asked softly. The boy didn't answer at first, only clinging a little tighter to Jackson. But after a pause, he nodded, a subtle gesture that carried more weight than words ever could. Jackson carefully helped the boy to his feet, steadying him. "We'll get you out of this mess," he said, scanning the area for the safest path back to his barn. He could see it in the distance, a modest structure surrounded by a wooden fence, the morning sunlight catching the red of the roof. It wasn't much, but it offered shelter, warmth, and safety, everything the boy needed right now. The journey there was slow. Every step had to be careful. The boy was unsteady, frightened, and still shivering from the cold river water. As they walked, Jackson tried to put the boy at ease. "Name's Jackson," he said, crouching slightly to meet the child's eye level. "What's yours?" The boy hesitated, glancing around as though unsure he could trust the stranger who had saved him. Finally, in a quiet, almost whispered voice, he said, "Dakota." Jackson nodded, letting the name linger in his mind. Dakota. Strong and resilient, yet small and vulnerable. "All right, Dakota," he said warmly. "We're almost there. Just a little further." The path back to the barn was lined with tall grasses that brushed against Jackson's arms, hiding small critters and insects that scuttled away at their approach. Birds began to stir, filling the morning air with song, though it did little to soothe the lingering tension. Jackson's mind wandered as they walked, thinking about how fragile life could be. One moment, a child could be caught in danger, and the next, a simple act of courage could change everything. The plains had a way of teaching lessons like this, harsh, swift, and unforgettable. By the time they reached the barn, the sun was higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the wooden planks. Jackson opened the doors, letting Dakota step inside. The warmth of the barn greeted them, and Jackson quickly grabbed a blanket from the loft, wrapping the shivering boy carefully. Dakota's eyes widened at the simple comfort, and he buried his face in the soft cloth, sighing as if a heavy weight had lifted from his small shoulders. Jackson set down a plate of bread and cheese, and Dakota began to eat quietly, his hands trembling slightly. Jackson watched him, heart full of both relief and curiosity. Who was this child? Where had he come from? And what would his people think of the cowboy who had dared to enter the river and save him? Jackson didn't have answers yet, but he knew one thing. A connection had been made, one that could not easily be broken. In that small barn, on that quiet morning, a bond was forming between a man and a child, a bond that neither time nor distance could sever. Hours passed. Dakota finally stopped eating and leaned back against the wall, eyes drooping with exhaustion. Jackson cleaned up the crumbs, feeling a quiet pride swell in his chest. He had seen fear, desperation, and fragility, but he had also seen courage and trust, the first tentative steps toward understanding and connection. Jackson knew that the plains were vast, wild, and often unforgiving, yet in this moment they also felt full of possibility. He had saved a life today, but in return he had gained something else. A reminder of the simple, powerful truth that kindness, no matter how small, could change the course of fate. As the day wore on, Jackson thought about what might come next. He had done what any decent man would do. He had saved a child. Yet deep inside he felt the stirrings of anticipation. Something told him that Dakota's tribe would soon make their presence known, and that whatever happened next, the quiet morning of rescue would be the beginning of an extraordinary story, one that would ripple far beyond the boundaries of his barn and the open plains. The sun continued to climb, painting the world in bright, unforgiving light, and Jackson, for the first time that day, allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He had stepped into the river and faced danger without hesitation. He had done the right thing, and somehow he knew that this morning, this act of courage and compassion would not soon be forgotten. By the time Jackson had settled Dakota on a makeshift bed of hay in the barn's corner, the morning sun had climbed high into the sky, spilling golden light across the wooden beams. Dust motes danced lazily in the warmth, catching the sunlight in a way that made the air inside the barn seem almost magical. Jackson adjusted the blanket around the boy, tucking it carefully beneath his small shoulders. Dakota's eyes were still wide, though no longer with fear. Now there was a spark of curiosity, of cautious trust, the kind that only comes when someone realizes they are safe. Jackson studied him, taking in the dirt streaked across his cheeks, the tiny bruises forming on his knees, the faint scratches that hinted at a struggle. He knew he couldn't leave the boy alone yet. The plains were unforgiving, and even a single mistake could prove deadly. Jackson stepped back, letting Dakota catch his breath. "You must be hungry," he said, glancing toward the small pile of bread and dried meat he had stacked on a wooden crate. The boy's gaze flickered toward it, but he didn't move immediately, still processing the kindness he had just received. Jackson knelt beside him. "It's all right. You don't have to be afraid of me. Eat. You need your strength." The words were soft, patient, carrying the weight of someone who had lived long enough to understand. They sat in quiet companionship for a while, the only sounds the distant call of birds, the rustle of wind through the grasses, and the creaking of the barn. Jackson considered the boy's future. He could not keep him forever. He had his own life, his own duties, and the plains were unforgiving for both of them if he tried to shelter Dakota for too long. And yet there was a bond forming, a connection that defied logic. Jackson thought about the boy's tribe, wondering whether they would come looking, whether they would be angry that their child had been taken by a stranger, even if that stranger had only meant to help. The uncertainty gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside. All he could do was protect the boy in the present, and the future would reveal itself in time. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, Jackson decided to venture outside and check the surrounding land. He motioned for Dakota to stay inside, and the boy obediently sank back into the hay, eyes following Jackson's every movement. The plains were quiet, almost too quiet, and Jackson's instincts told him to remain alert. He walked along the edge of his property, scanning for signs of danger, but all he found were the familiar tracks of deer and rabbits, the occasional fox, and the evidence of his own horses grazing lazily in the distance. Yet beneath the peace there was a tension that Jackson could not shake, the sense that this day, this simple act of rescue, would not be the end of the story. Returning to the barn, Jackson found Dakota sitting up, his small hands fidgeting with the blanket. Jackson knelt beside him. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Dakota shrugged, eyes downcast. "Hungry," he murmured. Jackson nodded, retrieving another piece of bread and some dried fruit. The boy accepted it without hesitation this time, the trust growing between them like a slow, steady flame. As Dakota ate, he glanced toward the horizon again, toward the distant tree line that marked the edge of the plains and the start of unknown territory. Jackson followed his gaze, wondering what lay beyond, wondering about the people waiting there, the family he had been separated from, and the journey that would eventually lead him back. Evening approached, casting long shadows across the barn floor. Jackson built a small fire in a safe corner, the flames crackling and providing warmth as the chill of the evening set in. Dakota watched the flickering light, entranced, as if the fire were a kind of magic. Jackson sat across from him, letting the boy absorb the moment. He wanted Dakota to feel safe, to know that for the first time in what must have been a long and frightening day, he was not alone. The boy finally spoke in a voice soft but clear. "Thank you." Jackson nodded, touched by the simplicity of the words. "No need to thank me," he said. "I did what anyone would do. You're safe now. That's all that matters." The boy's eyes grew heavy and he curled up in the hay, the blanket tucked around him like a protective cocoon. Jackson watched him for a while, marveling at how much resilience a small body could hold. Then, with the last light of day fading behind the hills, he stepped outside to look over the plains one more time. The wind whispered through the grasses, carrying with it a sense of something approaching, something beyond his understanding, a presence that hinted the boy's story was far from over. Jackson felt it in his bones, a quiet warning that the rescue was only the beginning, that the plains, vast and endless, would soon bring more than he could anticipate. Returning to the barn, he found Dakota asleep, breathing softly, and Jackson felt a rare sense of peace. He knew the boy's people would come eventually. The question was when, and how they would react to the stranger who had dared to save their child. Jackson did not fear confrontation, but he respected it. He had faced many dangers in his life. Storms, wild animals, and even men who would have seen him dead for the smallest slight. Yet, the thought of standing before a tribe to explain his actions filled him with a mixture of apprehension and quiet pride. He had done the right thing, and sometimes that was enough. As night fell over the plains, the stars began to emerge one by one, brilliant points of light in the inky sky. Jackson sat quietly outside the barn, listening to the wind and the soft sounds of life around him, feeling the weight of the day settle into his bones. Somewhere out there, Dakota's tribe was moving, talking, searching, and Jackson knew, deep in his heart, that the morning would bring more than just sunlight. It would bring a reckoning, a meeting, and perhaps a reward unlike any he had ever imagined. But for now, all he could do was wait, keeping watch over the boy who had stumbled into his life, a fragile spark of humanity he was determined to protect, no matter what the plains might bring. Dawn crept over the horizon like a whisper, spilling pale gold across the plains. Jackson awoke before the first rays fully touched the barn. his instincts honed by years of life on the frontier alert to every sound. The quiet was different that morning, too precise, too deliberate. There were no birdsong or rustling grasses, no distant calls of cattle or hawks circling lazily above. The wind moved softly, carrying a subtle rhythm that felt almost ceremonial. Jackson rose from his makeshift bed, careful not to disturb Dakota, who slept peacefully in the hay, curled up beneath the blanket. The boy's small chest rose and fell steadily, a fragile reminder of the life Jackson had fought to save just the day before. He stepped outside the barn, letting the cool morning air wash over him. The plains stretched endlessly in all directions, rolling and vast, the golden grasses swaying gently. Jackson scanned the horizon as he had done countless times before, eyes searching for signs of wildlife, weather, or danger. And then he saw them. At first he thought he was mistaken, his mind playing tricks after a restless night. But as he focused, the shapes solidified. Horses, hundreds of them moving in perfect formation, with riders atop them that gleamed in the early light. The sheer number was staggering, and their presence radiated authority, strength, and unspoken purpose. Jackson froze, heart pounding. He had faced raiders, bandits, and wild animals, but nothing like this. The riders were not scattered or chaotic. They were disciplined, moving as one, and the ground itself seemed to hum under the rhythm of their approach. As they drew closer, Jackson saw the warriors in detail, feathers adorning their heads, shields polished to a brilliant sheen, bodies painted with intricate designs that marked their tribe, their status, their history. The sight was overwhelming, a living tapestry of culture, pride, and power. Then he saw the boy, Dakota, at the front of the formation. He was standing tall on a small rise, waving, a broad smile spreading across his small face. Jackson's chest tightened. The boy was safe, and yet this sight stirred a mixture of awe and trepidation. These were not just people. They were guardians, a force of nature in their own right, and they had come for him not in anger, but in purpose. Jackson realized slowly, almost breathlessly, that this was not a threat. This was gratitude, respect, and recognition manifesting in the only way the plains seemed to know how, through the courage, discipline, and unity of the tribe. Jackson stepped back instinctively, scanning the space around him for any way to retreat if needed, though his mind argued against it. The warriors were not advancing aggressively. They stopped at the edge of the open field, forming lines that stretched as far as the eye could see, leaving a deliberate and respectful distance between themselves and the barn. Jackson's instincts told him to approach cautiously, yet there was a magnetic pull, a recognition that this encounter, whatever its outcome, would change his life forever. The leader of the warriors moved forward, a tall elder on horseback, his presence commanding yet serene. Jackson could see the elder's face painted in vibrant hues, eyes steady and piercing, reflecting wisdom that had been earned over decades. The elder signaled, a gesture Jackson did not understand but could feel the weight of. Jackson lifted a hand in return, a simple acknowledgement, a sign that he came in peace. The wind carried the faint sound of drums from the distant formation, rhythmic and powerful, setting a pulse that seemed to resonate with Jackson's own heartbeat. Dakota ran down the rise to meet them, laughter and excitement spilling from him as he waved frantically. Jackson watched, a smile creeping onto his own face despite the tension, realizing how much the boy had been missed, how vital his presence was to the tribe. Dakota's joy was infectious, a bridge between worlds that Jackson had only begun to understand. The elder halted a few paces from Jackson, dismounting with fluid precision, and approached on foot. Jackson's hands went instinctively to his belt. Though he did not draw any weapon, none was needed. The air itself spoke of trust and respect. The elder extended a hand in greeting, not in confrontation. Jackson paused, considering. Then slowly he stepped forward and accepted it. The handshake was firm, deliberate, carrying the weight of recognition, understanding, and shared humanity. The elder's eyes studied Jackson, piercing yet calm, as if measuring the depth of his character, the purity of his intentions. Jackson did not flinch. He met the gaze steadily, hoping his own eyes conveyed what words could not, that he had acted without malice, without expectation, only driven by the need to protect a child. A ripple passed through the warriors, a soundless acknowledgement that Jackson had passed a test of sorts. They relaxed slightly, though their formation remained intact, disciplined, and vigilant. Then the elder reached into a pouch at his side. The elder stepped closer again, speaking through gestures and a few carefully chosen words translated by Dakota. He nodded toward the barn, acknowledging the place of shelter and safety. Jackson bowed slightly, understanding the unspoken message. His home, his barn, had been a sanctuary, a place where trust had been extended and honor had been preserved. The medallion was more than a gift. It was a covenant, a promise of respect and remembrance. Jackson's mind raced with gratitude and awe. He had never sought reward for his actions, yet this moment, this overwhelming display of acknowledgement, left him humbled beyond words. The warriors began to move, surrounding the barn in a protective circle. Horses stamped, warriors shifted slightly, yet none encroached too close. Jackson could feel the intensity of their presence, a silent communication that said, "We know. We honor what you have done." He looked down at Dakota, who laughed softly, pointing to the medallion in Jackson's hand. "Jackson!" the boy exclaimed, voice bubbling with excitement. Jackson laughed, a sound mingling with relief and pride, as the weight of the morning settled over him. As the sun climbed higher, the elders and leaders of the tribe exchanged words in a language Jackson could not fully understand. Yet the gestures, the tone, and the rhythm conveyed everything he needed to know. He was accepted, his actions recognized, and his intentions understood. The warriors began a slow ceremonial march around the barn, their movements deliberate, echoing the patterns of the earth itself. Jackson watched, heart full, realizing he was witnessing not a display of force, but a ritual of gratitude, one that would be remembered for generations among Dakota's people. Hours passed and Jackson felt a profound connection forming. He saw the pride in the warriors' eyes, the joy in Dakota's laughter, and the calm authority in the elders. This was more than a rescue. It was a moment that bridged worlds, connected lives, and honored the sacred bond between kindness and courage. He felt a rare clarity in his soul, an understanding that the plains, vast and unpredictable, had a way of rewarding those who acted with integrity. He had stepped into a river and saved a child, but in return, he had gained a place in a story far greater than himself. As the morning wore on, the elder approached once more, speaking quietly to Jackson through gestures and simple words. He gestured toward the horizon, indicating that their journey would continue, yet he also made it clear that Jackson's role had been acknowledged, honored, and recorded in the collective memory of the tribe. Jackson nodded, feeling the weight of their message sink deep into his bones. This was no ordinary encounter. It was a rite of passage, a profound recognition of humanity, courage, and the power of a single act of compassion. Dakota climbed down, from Jackson's arms running to his people with unbridled joy. Jackson watched him disappear into the formation, feeling a mix of pride, awe, and melancholy. The boy was safe, and yet the moment also marked a shift, a reminder that life on the plains was larger than any single man, any single barn, any single day. Jackson realized that he had become a part of something timeless, a witness to the unbreakable bond between deed and recognition, between courage and honor. As the warriors began to retreat, slowly dissolving into the horizon like shadows merging, with the earth, Jackson felt the enormity of the morning settle over him. He stood there, medallion in hand, heart swelling with gratitude and awe. He had saved a life, yes, but he had also been given something far greater, a reminder that integrity, bravery, and compassion were recognized, honored, and remembered. The plains whispered around him, the grasses swaying gently as if in applause, and Jackson understood with clarity he had never felt before that his actions had created ripples that would travel far beyond the moment. And as the last warriors disappeared into the distant horizon, leaving only Dakota's small figure waving behind them, Jackson felt a sense of profound peace. The day had begun with a river, a struggle and fear. It had ended with respect, honor, and a bond that transcended words. Jackson knew that the plains, vast and wild, had a way of testing, rewarding, and remembering those who acted with courage and compassion. And in that quiet, sacred morning, he understood fully that he had earned something far beyond gratitude. He had earned a place in a story that would live long after the sun had set on these endless plains. The plains stretched endlessly in every direction, bathed in the golden glow of the morning sun. Jackson stood in the open field, the medallion still heavy in his hand, feeling the warmth of it radiate not just against his palm, but deep into his chest. The events of the past day, the rescue, the river, Dakota's fearful eyes, the arrival of the warriors, swirled in his mind like a vivid, unforgettable dream. And yet the moment was not over. The plains had a rhythm of their own, a pulse that seemed to beat in tandem with life itself, and Jackson felt it now more than ever. Every blade of grass, every rustling leaf, and every whispering wind seemed to echo the weight of the bond he had formed with Dakota and the boy's people. Dakota, bouncing with uncontainable energy, ran back into Jackson's arms, laughter spilling across the quiet field like a stream of sunlight. Jackson hugged him tightly, marveling at how small, fragile, and yet resilient the boy had become. "You're safe now," he whispered, holding him close. Dakota's laughter quieted, replaced by a look of wonder as he gazed back toward the horizon, where the warriors had disappeared. They came for me," he said softly, his voice tinged with awe. Jackson nodded, understanding fully. "Yes, they did. Because of you, because of your courage, and because of what we did together." The boy's eyes sparkled with a mixture of pride and amazement, and Jackson felt a pang in his chest. He had rescued the child, yes, but in doing so he had become a part of something larger, something timeless. Dakota tugged at his hand, pointing toward the barn. Show them?" he asked. Jackson realized the boy wanted to show his people where he had been cared for, where he had found refuge. With a gentle nod, he allowed Dakota to lead the way. Together they walked slowly back toward the barn, the golden grass brushing against their legs, the wind carrying whispers of life, history, and memory across the plains. The barn had never felt so significant. To Jackson, it had always been a simple structure: wooden planks, a roof, hay stacked high, a place to shelter animals or rest. But now it was transformed in his mind. It had become a sanctuary, a safe haven, a symbol of trust and kindness that bridged two worlds. Dakota ran ahead, pushing open the doors and beckoning Jackson to follow. Jackson stepped inside slowly, allowing the boy to explore and point out the details: the hay where he had slept, the corner where Jackson had cleaned him, the small basin of water that had washed away the grime and fear. Each gesture, each nod, each delighted squeal from the boy was a reminder of what had transpired, of the extraordinary kindness and courage that had brought them together. Jackson knelt down beside him, brushing his hand along the boy's shoulder. "It's all right," he said softly. "This place, it was just for you. A place to rest, a place to be safe. And now, you'll carry it with you, wherever you go." Dakota looked up at him, eyes wide, a mixture of understanding and wonder reflected in his small face. He reached up and touched Jackson's cheek lightly, a gesture of affection and gratitude that spoke louder than words ever could. Jackson felt his throat tighten. He had always known the plains could be harsh, unforgiving, and wild, but he had never truly understood the depth of their capacity for connection until this moment. Outside, the plains stirred. The distant hum of life returned. The soft murmur of wind through grass, the calls of birds, the rustle of small animals as they moved through the underbrush. Jackson glanced toward the horizon, half expecting the warriors to reappear. He did not have to wait long. From the distance, a single rider emerged first, moving steadily, a silent messenger bridging the gap between worlds. Jackson recognized the rhythm, the authority in each movement, and he felt a surge of anticipation. The rider approached, stopping a short distance from the barn, dismounting with fluid grace and making a series of gestures that Jackson could not fully understand, but could feel the weight of. Dakota ran to meet the rider, who handed him a small bundle wrapped in leather. The boy opened it carefully, revealing a finely crafted cloak, decorated with intricate patterns and symbols that told stories of generations past. Jackson could see the awe on Dakota's face as he held it close. "It's mine?" he asked, voice trembling with excitement. The rider nodded, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder in a gesture of approval and pride. Jackson smiled softly, recognizing the significance. The cloak was more than clothing. It was a symbol of honor, belonging, and recognition. It was a tangible reminder of the boy's courage, of his place within his tribe, and of the bond that had been forged with the man who had saved him. Jackson stepped closer, watching the interaction, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. He had rescued Dakota from the river, yes, but he had not anticipated the depth of gratitude, the ceremonial respect, or the emotional resonance that would follow. The plains had a way of amplifying actions, of turning simple deeds into extraordinary events that echoed far beyond the immediate moment. Jackson understood now that bravery was not always measured in guns or fists. Sometimes it was measured in the willingness to act with integrity, to protect the vulnerable, and to extend trust where none was guaranteed. The boy wrapped the cloak around himself, and Jackson could see the pride in his small posture. Dakota's eyes met his, and in them Jackson saw not just joy but understanding. The plains had taught a lesson in courage, compassion, and honor. The boy had learned it through fear, relief, and trust, and Jackson had learned it through action and reflection. The connection between them, fragile and strong at the same time, was cemented in the shared memory of danger, rescue, and respect. The elder appeared again, riding slowly this time, accompanied by several other leaders of the tribe. They stopped at the edge of the barn, dismounting with a fluid grace that conveyed authority tempered with wisdom. The elder approached Jackson, making gestures that Dakota translated simply, "We honor you. Your courage is recognized. Your heart is true." Jackson felt his chest swell with a profound sense of awe. Words were unnecessary. The gestures, the presence, and the solemnity of the moment spoke volumes. He nodded, accepting the acknowledgement, understanding that this was more than gratitude. It was a recognition of shared humanity, a bond that transcended language, culture, and circumstance. The warriors began to chant softly at first, then louder, the rhythm matching the beating of Jackson's own heart. The sound was mesmerizing, echoing across the plains, resonating in his chest and filling the barn with a sense of sacredness. Dakota danced lightly in his excitement, his small hands clapping to the rhythm, while Jackson stood back observing, humbled by the spectacle. The plains, once quiet and serene, now pulsed with life and ceremony, a living testament to the power of kindness, courage, and connection. Jackson realized something profound in that moment. Life on the plains was not just about survival. It was about relationships, honor, and respect. One act of bravery could ripple outward, touching lives far beyond immediate perception. Dakota's safety had been secured, yes, but what had unfolded in the morning was something larger. A recognition of moral courage, a validation of intent, a celebration of the good that one person could bring into the world. Jackson felt the enormity of it settle in his chest, a warmth that transcended pride or relief. It was understanding, gratitude, and awe all wrapped into one unshakable feeling. The elder handed Jackson a small satchel, tied with leather thongs and filled with gifts, finely carved figurines, dried herbs, and small trinkets of cultural significance. "For you?" Dakota whispered, translating. Jackson accepted the gifts, touched by the thoughtfulness and symbolism. Each item carried meaning beyond what he could understand, representing trust, respect, and connection between worlds. Jackson felt the weight of responsibility deepen, not just for Dakota, but for the legacy of actions taken with integrity and compassion. Hours passed in this sacred communion. Jackson and Dakota shared stories through gestures and simple words, the elder and the tribe observing and participating in subtle ways. Jackson learned bits of Dakota's life, his love for the land, his curiosity, his bravery, his family. Dakota learned about Jackson's world too, about life on the ranch, the rhythm of the plains, the duties of a man who had chosen to act without expectation. Slowly, a bridge formed, not just between two individuals, but between two worlds, two ways of seeing life, two rhythms of survival and respect. As the sun began to descend toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the field, the elders mounted their horses, preparing to leave. Dakota ran to Jackson, hugging him tightly. "Don't forget me," he whispered, tears glistening in his eyes. Jackson held him close, heart aching with the bittersweet knowledge that parting was inevitable. "I'll never forget you," he promised. "Not for a day, not for a year, not ever." Dakota smiled through his tears, releasing him reluctantly and running back to the waiting warriors. Jackson watched as the tribe moved slowly into the distance, their formation precise, their presence commanding and serene. The plains were quiet once more, but the weight of the morning lingered. Jackson clutched the medallion in his hand, a tangible reminder of courage, compassion, and the extraordinary consequences of a single act of kindness. He realized that the plains had tested him, challenged him, and ultimately honored him in ways he had never imagined. Dakota had returned to his people safe and proud, and Jackson had been given a glimpse of something far greater than survival, the enduring power of human connection. As the last shadows of the warriors disappeared into the horizon, Jackson stood alone, breathing deeply, feeling the wind on his face, the sun warming his back. The plains stretched endlessly, still and eternal, yet forever changed by the events of the day. Jackson smiled softly, a quiet, contented smile, knowing that the story of this morning, the river, the rescue, the warriors, and the bond he shared with Dakota, would echo in memory, in legend, and in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. He had acted with courage, he had chosen kindness, and the plains had responded with a gift beyond measure. And in that quiet, sacred moment, Jackson understood fully: one act, one choice, one moment of courage could ripple across the world, shaping destinies, uniting worlds, and leaving a legacy that would endure far beyond the fleeting passage of a single day. The plains whispered their approval, the grasses swayed gently, and Jackson, heart full, knew that he had not only saved a life, but had been forever changed in return.